All right, welcome to Lab Science, the #1 podcast covering music production, business, songwriting, and studio technique. I'm your host, Professor Sense.
And I'm Lean Automatic.
Good to hear, see, and feel you all today.
Yes, sir.
I'm really excited, personally, about today's episode. I think it'll help a lot of people at home. The whole kind of gist of this thing is to reach out to folks and help them become better artists. So I feel like the topics that we're going to cover today are really relevant for most artists. Today, we're going to be talking about making and streamlining your home studio.
Oh, yeah, this is important.
Absolutely. So, if you don't have a full workspace, we're going to talk about some of the things that you should prioritize first. A lot of people will tell you need this piece of gear first. You should start with this. We're going to run down the list and give you the things that we think you need best in order and give you some advice as to what to select. And then for those of you that already have studio spaces in your home, we're going to talk about ways to make that more efficient, upgrade paths, some simple solutions to some of your problems. And we'll take it to the web to answer some of your questions related to the issues that you're having in your studio space. So very exciting stuff.
Oh, yeah, I'm sweating over it.
I should actually use this as a time to mention. For whatever reason, it's 90,000 degrees in Brooklyn today. It's like 40 degrees hotter than it was yesterday. So it's hot as hell in our studio space. So the windows are open. If you hear Bed-Stuy and someone get shot or stabbed outside, my bad. That also means that we've time traveled because the new Bed-Stuy is more like Starbucks.
nothing like shot and stabbed Bed-Stuy.
Absolutely. But I was listening to Warning earlier, so my mind is in a different place. But I should also take this time to mention that we are currently looking for sponsors for the show. We are a completely independent platform, so if you're interested in getting involved, shoot us an email at labsciencepodcast@gmail.com. We'll also be doing product reviews in the future and tutorials in the future. So if you have gear or software that you want analyzed over copious amounts of sativa, again, shoot us an email at labsciencepodcast@gmail.com.
Yes, sir.
Word. So, some of my favorite, proudest moments as a young producer was bringing young rappers and young singers to my, really small and really hot apartment and showing them that we could record their songs right from the living room.
There's really no rapper that I could think of in the world that didn't start like this.
That's an interesting point.
Every single rapper started in their friend's living room or bedroom or wherever they were.
Yeah. And it's in my opinion, it's still the most liberating environment to make music.
Absolutely.
I think a lot of people associate recording at home with this loss of quality, but I think when you have tools that are good enough to get the job done and you have this space where you can freely record at, in your underwear with no one looking, that's an amazing thing that you don't get in a studio at all. You know what I mean?
For sure.
When was your first kind of at-home setup where you could record at? Do you remember that experience? What was your first setup like?
Yeah, definitely. So after years of tying strings to doorknobs and plucking them like a guitar, I finally got a guitar. Got my first laptop. It was like a gray brick.
Yeah.
It was like, I thought it said NASDAQ on it, but I don't see that it's possible. It was like NASDAR.
Probably a compact?
Yeah,
I'm gonna assume.
Oh, yeah, there we go. Compact.
Little Presario joint?
Yeah, exactly.
Word.
Oh, my God, it was the worst. And I had a record producer.
Yeah. Oh, man.
It was like a crash waiting to happen. Every time you open it, it was just like, this is going to crash.
That's tight. So I feel this was a weirder one actually in a lot of ways, but my first recording setup was like Cool Edit.
Oh, word.
Fruity Loops maybe like 1 point something.
Yeah.
But I had the demo version of both of those. So they all had save was disabled for everything.
Yeah.
So, once you turn your session off, that was it. So I would make beats in Fruity Loops and then plug my Sound Blaster sound card into a boombox and then just record the beats onto a cassette.
Yo,
that was
gangster.
it. So like when dudes wanted to buy a beat, I'm just like, it's on this tape.
It's on tape,
That's
bro.
all you have.
Yo, digital to tape?
And it's funny. That's
crazy.
I still kind of do that.
Yeah.
And now I can just bring it back into Ableton, but we'll talk about that in a future episode. Cool. So, I think it's safe to say we both started out with sketchy,
very sketchy situations.
very sketchy situations. If you had the chance to do it all over today, you're not rich by any means, but you're starting with no gear. I think that's what I want to tackle today. How would you do it differently?
Yeah.
And so the number one thing that you obviously have to start with is the brain. So we're talking about a DAW.
Exactly.
What DAW is your DAW choice and why?
Well, I am an Ableton Live user. You know, for me, it's about the workflow and how quickly can I get an idea out and move on to the next idea, you know, next section of the song or the next song entirely.
Yeah.
And I feel like Ableton Live has really streamlined that process for us.
Yeah.
You know, with your clip view, with your session view and arrangement view, you're really able to bounce back and forth between your ideas and the final edit of your work.
Right on. So you're doing most of your production or all of your production in Ableton currently.
Ableton Live, yeah.
Ableton Live currently. I'm in the same boat when it comes down to production.
Yeah.
I do bounce back and forth between Live and Pro Tools when it comes down to the mixing stages.
Exactly. Yeah, that makes sense.
So for producers that are new to the process, I think a big part of the decision making here comes down to what you plan on doing with your career. Are you a producer that wants to make music for somebody and then hand that off? Are you a vocalist that just wants to record to music that you get from other producers? Are you a recording engineer that wants to just mix other artists? I think that's probably the biggest part of the puzzle that you have to figure out when you're figuring out a DAW.
Definitely.
So for me, in terms of writing, I agree with you. Ableton has been the tool that I really enjoy getting my ideas and my compositions down in. And I'm even using it more for mixing.
Yeah.
I think the sound of current music has kind of tilted towards an Ableton sound
Definitely.
just because so many people are using it. But I do think for new producers and new engineers, especially if you want to mix other artists, it's really important to look at Pro Tools and it's really important to look at Logic.
Yep.
Do you have any experience with Logic? Are you a Logic user at all?
I have, you know, messed around with Logic a little bit. My brother, Soul Melodic, Jay Casso, he uses Logic and, you know, he records himself and he went to 5 Towns, learned it all there.
Yep.
And he'd come over and record me sometimes. So I've definitely worked in Logic and I know a bunch of people that use it, but I don't know. It's not for me.
Right on.
Yeah.
I think it's a matter of saying to yourself, hey, I'm new to this process. What do I want to do with it?
Yeah.
In my opinion, if you're an engineer first, you need to learn Pro Tools.
Definitely.
Even if it's not the tool that you natively want to use, some people do find it clunky compared to current interfaces. It's going to be what you see in the industry. A lot of clients are going to ask you to work with that format because that's what they have.
It's basically step one when you get to the studio.
Absolutely. But that being said, I think if you're a new engineer, it's a really important time to embrace Logic too. Because I do see it becoming more of a staple in studios going down the line. It's really accessible, has a really big sound to it. And it's also a really good writing tool like Ableton.
Yeah.
And it has that added benefit of being really good with film. So for our engineering cats, keep that in mind. I think Pro Tools and Logic are probably the 2 DAWs that you want to look at. Now, in terms of writing, our producers, I think it's relatively safe to say that the 2 most popular tools in our industry anyway are Ableton and FL Studio.
Yeah. As a producer, yep.
So I had my origins in FL Studio. I definitely think that there's a timbre in terms of the drums that you can't get in other DAWs.
That's true.
There's a low end that kind of defined that trap sound really.
Yeah. That definitely defines some of that trap vibe.
So, you know, I've heard a lot of producers really struggling with trying to get that sound in other DAWs. I would say that if trap is your genre, love or hate or whatever, if that's what you're trying to do, that's a big way to ease the process of figuring out how to make that sound.
Yeah.
When it talks about how to do pitch bending and the way that the pitch bend is done in the piano roll in FL Studio, that's what you get that metro booming, like kind of swooping bass line.
It's like a wavy, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
And you can emulate that in other DAWs with pitch bend and all that, but out of the box, that's what FL Studio will give you.
Yep.
So that's a big part of the writing DAW discussion that I always try to bring up for new producers. But that being said, I think the biggest way for artists and producers nowadays to make money is to be able to perform live.
Yeah. You want to be able to bring your production to the stage.
Absolutely. And there's a huge career path for being a live performer or being a producer that makes content for other artists to perform when they're on stage. And for that, Ableton Live is, in my opinion, the #1 piece of software for that.
Well, that's what it was created for.
Absolutely.
Originally, it was the live performance. And, you know, people, basically the users forced the developers into creating a whole nother engine to work with the session view.
Yep.
Yep. You know, so now we can produce the song, chop it up, and then perform it live seamlessly without ever pressing stop.
Yep. And you know, there's been this whole debate about the Ableton sound, and I think anything that has an output option or a bouncing option has a color that it adds to it.
Yeah.
And I think for a long time we didn't embrace the quote unquote Ableton sound because folks didn't really know how to mix it yet. I think Ableton involves understanding how to play with distortion a little bit more.
Yep.
And I think we've gotten to that point where engineers and producers got it.
I think it does take a lot more layering. You got to work for it in Ableton, definitely.
Absolutely.
You know.
But I mean, if you work for it, you get a sound that's very, very contemporary.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So those are some kind of guidelines in case you folks are looking for an idea as to what DAW I want to use. We would love to know which DAW our current producers are using and why. So if you have any input, please shoot us a message on Twitter at LabSciencePod and chime in.
Can you do more than what you're doing? Then do it. Can you do more than what you're doing? Can you do more than what you're doing? Then do it. Can you do more than what you're doing? Then do it. Can you do more than what you're doing? Can you do more than what you're doing? Then do it. Can you do more than what you're doing? Can you do more than what you're doing? Then do it. Can you do more than what you're doing? Then do it. Can you do more than what you're doing? Then do it. Can you do more than what you're doing?
So you just listened to this week's winning homework assignment. This one comes out of the way of Seattle, Washington by our homie Duke Dank. I think he took Lean Automatic's voice from the first podcast episode, threw that into his Chaos Pad, added some beatboxing effects, and he came up with a completely new production. And folks, that's what this is all about. We assign these assignments so you guys can think out of the box, treat your music differently, and start your day working on something that you wouldn't have normally worked on. So this week, we'd love for you to put your focus into your drums. So for our homework assignment, we want you to submit a 30-second drum track. Nothing but percussive elements, nothing but drum elements. And next week, we'll be talking about some synthesizers. We'll be using some of your homework assignment for the audio demos. So if you hear your drum break playing next week, that means you are a winner of a prize package. You'll be getting samples and stickers from Lab Science, just like Duke Dank will be getting this week. Now, back to more Lab Science. So I think this is the stage where a lot of producers kind of prioritize a bit backwards, and I can understand why. You've got your DAW, you know, and you're ready to start making music. So your logical brain says it's time to get a controller. It's time to get, you know, a keyboard or some type of thing that I can hit with pads and buttons and knobs. But I think if I could go back, if we're going back and talking about that kid starting a studio over again, I would be saving my money and waiting for an audio interface by now.
Yeah. Way before the controller.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, that's one thing that I didn't do before.
Yeah.
And, you know, the logic is for a lot of people anyway, hey, I have a headphone out so I can plug in some headphones and then I can just make my music and I'll learn about mixing later. And as I'm learning about mixing, then I'll get a better audio interface. But the problem with that is audio interfaces have better audio to digital conversion. So that's the sound going in and out of the box, basically. Yep. And headphone ports are inherently way, way worse than what you would get from a Pro Audio sound card. So when you're writing and you're listening to these amazing compositions that sound full, and you're trying to get that bass to register in your headphones, you're distorting, you're mixing improperly because you have a wrong reference in your ears.
False representation.
Absolutely.
What's actually coming through.
And then when you do that, you start to do things to compensate for that, and those become habits. Yeah. And so by the time you have a good sound card, you're doing things out of habit that you really shouldn't be doing because they're compensating for the bad system you've been listening on.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think an audio interface out of the box is really important. There's also the whole CPU thing. It's going to make your computer run way, way smoother.
It takes a lot of stress off of your computer, ultimately giving you more time to work.
Yep. Giving you more time to work and giving you more tracks to work with. So, you know, I guess there's always the question of, well, I don't necessarily know what I'm going to be doing and a lot about the process yet. So how do I buy an interface? Like, what am I looking for? And I think there's a couple of things. Buy with the future in mind.
Yeah.
You know, we all have this tendency to budget as producers. We want to save money for the next thing. But the biggest thing that I look for are inputs and outputs and connectivity.
Definitely inputs, outputs first.
Word. And when I say connectivity, I mean literally, how does this plug into my computer? Is it FireWire? Is it Thunderbolt? Is it USB? You want to not have to update this thing for a while.
Yep.
So if you know that, okay, my sessions probably need 4 inputs on average, get a sound card with at least 8. If you know USB is about to be extinct in a year when you're buying your first sound card, maybe you should get a Thunderbolt one.
Go Thunder.
And again,
It's made for those files.
absolutely.
It's made for audio files.
Absolutely. So it becomes a thing where I know you're playing with budget, but I think when you're talking about your audio interface, this is the one thing that's going to be used on every single session. So
Yeah.
you don't want to skimp in on price, and you also don't want to skimp on warranty.
Yeah.
We do all this research on ins and outs, and I think a lot of producers don't read that fine print. And there's a lot of really great companies when it comes down to their warranty policies and a lot of really bad ones.
Yeah.
So you don't want to be burned.
Definitely. I think another important aspect to look at on your audio interface is direct to monitoring.
Yes.
It's very important.
So my first sound card was, I won't bash the company, but my first sound card was a budget sound card, and it didn't have direct monitoring. For folks who don't know what this is, there's something called latency or lateness that's picked up whenever you have a microphone plugged into a computer. There's a delay between what you say and then when you hear it. And when you're recording your voice or an instrument, imagine trying to record your voice, but there's a delay to when you actually hear it. It messes the whole process up.
Right.
So direct monitoring allows you to hear the input in real time. You don't have to worry about that latency. You get an input straight from the microphone, straight from the source.
Yep.
And if you're recording vocalists, if you're recording anybody who plays an instrument, it's an essential
If you're recording.
thing. Yeah, if you're recording.
If you're using a microphone and recording, you should have direct monitoring.
Absolutely. And a lot of budget sound cards will save some money by skipping that, and they just will omit that in in the description.
Phantom power as well.
Phantom power is also very important.
You need that for your mic.
Absolutely. Condenser microphones basically require external power. They won't work without phantom power, so that's something else you always want to look for. And again, when you're dealing with budget sound cards, a lot of companies will omit talking about it just to hope that you don't notice it. And then you buy a sound card that's missing something that you really need for your future sessions.
Another key element is if you can split your outs. If you could split the chain of your outs. So meaning, you have 2 outs going to your house system and you have 2 outs going to a monitoring system for yourself or a person playing with you or just another source.
Yeah.
Where maybe you can send a click track.
Yeah.
But that doesn't go to the house.
Yeah.
So you want to be able to split your outs. There's one that I really like. There was a Focusrite 2 and 4 out. I was able to, split my chains.
Yeah.
I could send 1/4 inches to the house system, and I could send RCA to the DJ booth, and I could send RCA to another headphone with a click track in it.
That's awesome.
So it's really important if that's what you need, if that's what you want.
And I think at some point in time, you're going to need that.
You're going to need that.
If you plan on recording more than just yourself,
Yeah.
you're going to need multiple outs that you can set volumes on, have dedicated input and output levels on.
Definitely.
I think Focusrite is a great company to mention, especially for folks looking for new audio interfaces, because they have things at different price points
Yeah.
and at different in and out configurations. So they'll work with you. I'm also a big fan of Apogee, where you're using an Apogee Duet to record the podcast currently. I also use an Apogee Jam to record guitar a lot. They're really good for high fidelity kind of circuitry. They have a really good preamp behind them. But there's a lot of really great choices. We'd love to hear what you're using for your sound cards and your audio interfaces. And if you have an audio reference, be sure to drop that into our account on our SoundCloud page. Okay, so we're going to take a break real quick. We'll be right back with some more lab science. All right, we're back. I am Professor Sense,
Lean Automatic.
And this is Lab Science, the #1 podcast covering music production, business, songwriting, twerking, making it rain, going to the club, turning up, tricking, all that etc. stuff. Reminder, go follow us on Instagram. We're at Lab Science Podcast. Tab your studio spaces. We want to see where you're working. Lab Science Podcast is our hashtag for that. We're going to pick a winner next week. I'm going to send them some swag directly from the good spots in Brooklyn.
Hell yeah.
So we've got our DAW picked out. We've got our interfaces picked out. Now this is usually the part of the equation where if you're on a budget, you have to pick between headphones or a speaker layout. I personally think you need both.
You absolutely need both.
Just for referencing, I think just save up until you have both.
And to take a break.
True.
Can't have headphones on forever, man.
True.
You'll start to lose your, spectrum, basically.
Yep. You'll damage your ears on top of that.
Yeah.
And also, headphones, as great as they are for like panning isolation, they don't give you a perfect sense of reverb.
No, not at all.
Reverb is one of those things you kind of have to
You
hear
gotta
on
stand
speakers.
back. You gotta step back.
You need to really hear it in a space to get that contrast. But I know we're going to have someone that says, well, I don't care. I'm only going to buy one. That's just the way it is. And I also know that we do have some folks that are looking to update their speakers and update their headphones. So what would you get first if you had to get one first?
Well, we're in New York. We're in Brooklyn. Space is very limited. Not everybody's got, the space or the patient neighbors to have monitors.
That's a good point.
So we go headphones first.
That's a good point. That's a very, very good point. I had my answer ready to be speakers because I'm so diligent about this. You need to hear the reverb and the EQ. But, that's a very good point. Your location is really integral on this.
Yeah.
I'm really loud with my neighbors, so I just tell them you're going to have to deal with the music.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of folks do have to go headphones first. Do you have any favorite models?
Right now I'm using the Audio Technique, or what am I rocking right now? Audio Technica.
Word.
MX50As.
Word.
And they're dope. Very comfortable. I use them to produce at home. I use them for, mixing references.
Yeah.
And then my drummer uses them in a live setting also.
Nice.
So, or our drummer.
Yeah. I know the guy.
Wait a minute.
Hold on. No, Audio Technica has always been a really diligent company when it comes down to studio headphones.
Yeah.
They're very isolated. And,
they're awesome.
When I say isolated, I mean sound doesn't leak out of them.
Yeah.
So they've always been a kind of go-to. They're a really good mid-range model too in terms of price.
Definitely, it gets kind of crunchy in here.
Yeah,
but I like it. It's good.
It's good on the
good
highs.
Crunch, yeah,
for sure. I'm all about. I'm gonna mispronounce this company. I think it's III. It's spelled AI. Company out of Europe. They make a new series of headphones. They've been around for a while.
Yeah.
And I've loved them for their customer service for years. But they have this new series of modular headphones where you basically can select the cup size. You can select, the cable length, the driver type, and kind of customize your headphones.
That's such an awesome idea.
It's a great
full customization.
It's a great move, and to take it a step further, it's not one of those things where they build it out of the factory and they send it to you. They send you all the parts, and they're easy to pick apart and put back together.
Yeah.
So you can have multiple configurations. So I often recommend new producers and old producers alike just looking to get new headphones to these guys because that modular setup allows you to decide what kind of headphones you want to have that day.
Yeah.
They have a set of drivers that are really flat and made for engineering, so you can pop those in when you're mixing. They have a set of drivers that are really heavy in the highs and lows, so you can use that for when you're tracking vocals. So those are my go-to guys for sure. They have really good warranties too. So yeah, we'd love to hear what kind of headphones you guys are using. So again, hit us up on Twitter at LabSciencePod. Cool. So with regards to speakers.
All right, monitoring.
Yes.
Real monitoring.
Yeah.
We've got the space. They've got the patience.
You've yelled at your neighbors enough to get a pair of speakers.
Let's get the bass going. My favorite pair of monitors right now, I love the Yamaha NS8s.
Word. I mean, Yamaha has always been a staple.
Is it NS or NH?
I think it's NS.
I think it's NS.
Yeah.
The big ones, the white cones, the 8s.
Those are the NS.
Super clean.
Yeah. Of course, we were both wrong, and the actual model number is the HS8.
Go! And you just get a really, really awesome representation of what's going on.
They're by far, from the speakers I've worked with, the most honest. And when you're talking about monitoring, that's what you really need.
Yeah.
That's absolutely what you aim for. I do see, this is where I get myself in trouble. But I look at it as a producer too, and just as a fan of listening to music. I know my studio monitors are going to be my listening speakers too.
Yeah.
So I get caught in this conundrum of, okay, I know I just want a speaker that sounds honest, but I also want them to sound really good for my genres.
Definitely.
And the Yamahas make you work to sound really good in hip hop.
Yeah.
And that's great for mixing. That's probably what you need for mixing. But, I think a big part of doing a good job with your speakers is learning your speakers. You have to be willing to listen to them day in and day out.
Yeah.
And every time I owned, NS10s, I always was like, I'm going to listen to this in my headphones because it sounds better on the bass. You know what I mean?
That's true. Yeah, the bass.
So
Definitely.
if you are in that box, again, I say go for the most honest ones. The NS series, they're really, really honest, and you should do that. But if you're that, that idiot that I am, look for as honest as you can get within the confines of your genre. So the Rocket series, for example.
Yeah, the Rockets are dope.
They're really popular in hip hop because they have more pronounced bass. I think if you mix knowing that and treat that accordingly and reference on other things, you'll get away with working with those.
Yeah.
My personal favorites are the Event series. I have the old Event 8s. They don't even make these anymore, but the new ones sound very, very similar. They actually sound a bit better in my opinion, so they should send me a pair. But I think Event does a really good job at being really good with regards to how it sounds and how fun it sounds to listen to them, but they're also still really honest to listen to. But yeah, I think the rule of thumb is really no matter what kind of speakers you have, if you're mixing on, laptop, don't mix on laptop speakers, but if you're mixing on like desktop hi-fis, for example, as long as you're listening to these things all the time and you know what your favorite records sound like, you at the very least have a frame of reference.
Bring them around.
And then bring that mix around, listen to it in other situations and kind of fine tune what you can from there.
Tell your taxi driver to throw it on, man.
Give me that aux, bro. I need to check this mix one time. I wonder if that's a tax write-off.
It's gotta be.
Is that a loophole? Like
we just black spaced the loophole.
That's a loophole. So like check it. If I'm going to the club, right? But I'm checking a mix on the aux.
Yeah.
That should be a tax write-off because that's just a remote listening session.
Exactly.
I'm going to do that going forward. But, another piece of advice that I have for producers and engineers looking for speakers, for replacement speakers or new ones, I think we're really quick to get speakers that are too big for the space that we're in. And, that's usually the case in rooms that are boxy, that have not been treated. I know it's not aesthetically possible for a lot of you to treat your rooms, or it may not be financially possible for a lot of you to treat your rooms. If that is the case, you don't need large speakers.
No.
You're giving yourself more problems to fix when it comes down to early reflections and bass getting trapped and things that are there getting distorted in your ears that you don't need.
Although I have been told as well as seen the difference between a 5-inch speaker and an 8-inch speaker.
It's a huge difference.
It's a huge difference. And there are some frequency ranges, I think, on the low end with the 5s that you're not going to get. It's not going to come through.
I think the big elephant in the room when you're making that decision is my room's not treated.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. It's one of those things where those frequencies that have been omitted from a 5-inch sub versus an 8-inch sub are not there or they won't give you problems in that space.
Yeah.
And that's kind of why it's okay to work with it.
Exactly.
But I think if you're thinking about making that switch from a 5-inch to an 8-inch sub and you're in a room that's already giving you problems with that 5, that might not be what you want to change in the room.
Yeah.
Think about doing something as simple as a bass trap down, something as simple as a diffuser. And a diffuser could be, you can Google this. You can get these really cheap on Amazon. But a diffuser on your left ear and your right ear and above your console or even behind your monitors will make a huge world of difference and make it okay to make that jump from 5 to 8.
Yeah.
For sure. All right, so this next thing that I wanted to look at is probably my favorite. MIDI controllers.
Oh, so many of them.
I literally have a MIDI port on my arm. I'm so excited. My whole life as a producer changed when I got a MIDI controller. I made beats on a computer with like a mouse and a keyboard for a good 2 years.
So long.
Before I got a controller. And I could never go back. I mean, I can,
No way.
I can do editing and all that, but I start to fiend to have a controller
You
in
need
my
to
hands
play
after a
something.
while. Absolutely. But I think, again, like all of these things, it's difficult for people to figure out what's the first type of controller I should get because there's so many different types. You know, you've got keyboard controllers, which are just, they look like a keyboard, they look like a piano, versus things that have customized layouts.
Yeah.
An Ableton Push, a machine.
I think with those kinds of controllers, though, you start moving away from MIDI,
That's true.
and you're working with Python
That's very true.
with the push.
That's very true.
That's one thing to keep in mind.
That's very true. Even I guess that kind of extends on the question that I was going to ask. When you learn with one of these new controllers, an MPC Renaissance, a Machine, a Push, they're awesome. I use them quite frequently.
Yeah.
Do you do yourself a disservice by skipping over just the standard keyboard MIDI layout? Have you skipped a step?
I've taught always people who've asked, just go with a blank surface first.
What do you mean by that?
Go with just an open controller. You can assign anything to anywhere, because this way you're really able to learn the technique of MIDI mapping, just controlling different parameters and setting them wherever you want,
Interesting.
as opposed to plugging something in and have it be ready for you. It's kind of like, you're skipping the step of learning how that process works.
Interesting.
I always say go with just a blank controller, start with a blank slate, and start assigning things accordingly.
Interesting. And I think that's really a good way to look at it that I didn't think about. When you have a machine or a push, they've given you a workflow to work with.
Yeah.
But having something maybe like a Novation Launch Key,
Yep.
where it's literally just a bunch of keys, a bunch of knobs, a bunch of pads, and you get the opportunity to start from square one.
You say what is what, and the Akai series, a lot of the
LPKs, the MPKs.
MPK series. That 25 key with the pads. Oh my God, it's like I could bring that thing everywhere, and I write all the Black Space Odyssey tracks that I've done has been with that MPK 25.
Yeah. And you have a push.
And I have a push. I use push to in the production stage. I'll use it for composition.
Yeah.
Because I can trigger the clips better, and you can get like a nice DJ workflow almost with the push.
Yeah.
And that's how I write the songs basically.
Yeah.
But the MPK 25 and then a synth basically is what it is.
Yeah. That's all you need.
Yeah.
That's really all you need. I think, that's important for folks that are looking for a new intro into Ableton or, into any DAW really. The more standardized that controller is, the longer it's going to last you.
Yeah.
You can take that LPK or MPK, and even if you switch to Logic or anything else, it's still going to work.
Still gonna work. And there are out of the box functionalities. I think I'm not sure about Logic, but I know in Ableton Live, if I plug in the MPK
Oh, yeah.
and don't map anything,
Yeah.
it'll start twisting, your ADSR and
Yep.
different clips or whatever. But I just screw that and always assign my own parameters.
I think it's no matter what you're working with, if you can assign your own and start from scratch, it benefits you in the long run
Yeah.
to do that. It might take longer, but it gets you closer to your own sound. for
Definitely.
sure.
And that push though, that is not MIDI.
Right.
That's Python. It's a different folder. It's different file type
Yep.
that Ableton Live reads from. So you could still map it, but you're not going to be able to send MIDI signal to it.
Yeah. There's Max for Live plugins. I use one
Yeah.
called 8CCs, which is a free Max plugin that converts that signal to
Okay,
a MIDI
to
CC
MIDI.
signal.
Word.
But that's a really important thing to mention.
Yeah.
If you're working with a push, that's a different language that's speaking. So you're not.
Have you ever
singing.
tried to plug a push in with Logic or Pro Tools?
I haven't. I haven't.
either.
I think I've seen conversion software that again will change the scripting of it.
Yeah.
But I think natively, I don't think that would work.
I think do those programs read Python?
I'd have to check.
I don't know that either.
That's a good question for our audience, I guess.
Yeah.
If you know the answer to whether or not you can read Python and Logic, Lean has a question for you. Hit us up on Twitter. We would love to know. So I guess I would love to move on to kind of the last part of the chain, at least in terms of bare basics. And that's that little object that we need to record this podcast, microphones.
Microphone.
Microphones. I made so many goddamn mistakes buying
So many microphone mistakes. Microphone graveyard.
Yeah. I mean, just so many
Piles.
so many fucking mistakes on both sides of the spectrum.
Yeah.
It's funny. The first mic I bought was a shitty $20 Radio Shack mic.
Oh, yeah.
And I made the mistake of thinking it was good enough to be a studio mic. And then I made the mistake of throwing that shit out when I realized that it wasn't.
Yeah.
And the two lessons I learned in that was A, do your homework and get a real fucking mic.
Mm-hmm.
But B, any mic can be used as an input.
Absolutely. You could do some work with that Radio Shack mic.
And I miss it to this day.
Yeah.
So as a new producer, again, we have this person who is forced to pick what they're going to get. I think a lot of times you try to buy the most expensive condenser.
Yeah.
And that's it.
That's not really necessary.
It's really not. Something that an engineer taught me was you should have a 58 no matter what.
Yes. You need that SM58.
An SM58 is going to be a microphone you see on every stage. And all of your artists are going to have to perform on at some point.
Yep.
So if you can't get a voice sound to get on a 58, then you've just started the game flawed.
Basically, the stage standard, most durable dynamic microphone I've ever used.
This is a Shure SM58.
Yes, Shure SM58. I was actually banned from what's I busted up a few SM58s from at a college show, and they banned me from that college.
Yeah.
For an indefinite amount of time because they tried to make me pay the $100 fee, and I was like, bro. That's the business, baby. Like, I'm into breaking mics.
I don't recommend breaking mics if you're trying to get your fee for artists that are on the road.
No.
My advice, if I could go back, would be to spend, after the whole like Radio Shack phase, I went on this whole I'm going to get really high-end condensers phase.
Yeah.
And that was also stupid too. I got a lot of great mics, don't get me wrong. But I realize more and more as I get older, it's really about having a lot of choices when it comes down to having microphones.
Definitely.
And you almost do yourself better to have more mid-range mics than having one or two really expensive mics.
Yeah, because you're only going to get that one or two kinds of sound.
Yep.
Maybe you set up a couple other mics, and get a mix of a few of them.
Yep. It's one of those things where, I do get a lot of pushback on this, and, you get the guys that say, get a fucking Neumann, and if you can get a Neumann, great, go for it. But realistically speaking, I think the average producer does himself better justice in learning mic technique.
Yeah.
And you learn mic technique by giving yourself a couple of options. You get yourself a good condenser. You get yourself a good dynamic mic. You get a large diaphragm, a small diaphragm. And you work with them, and you work with where you stand in front of the mic, and you work with placement and room. And that's how you learn to work with your cabinet.
Pop filter.
Pop filter does a long way, too.
Pop filter is the essential part of microphone shopping.
A pop filter is that lovely little round discus that you see in front of Gucci Mane when he's flipping on Smack DVD. But yeah, that's essential. That gets rid of all those hard B and hard P sounds. So
we also use the SE electronics reflection filter.
That's a good point.
Goes around the back of the microphone.
When these things, and SE was the first company that really did this at a professional model to me.
This reflection filter is the tits.
Yeah, it's fucking amazing.
It's so good.
A lot of people gave it shade when they first came out because they didn't know. I guess they thought it would be this like vocal booth solution. And a lot of folks didn't even know what a vocal booth was supposed to do in the first place.
Yeah.
But, when it comes down to getting rid of like that early reverb, that early reflection sound.
Yep.
It's amazing. It cuts through everything.
It soaks up every little sweet piece of your vocal line.
If you've had issues with your vocals sounding muddy in your room, or if clarity has been an issue with vocals, I strongly recommend a reflection filter. I can't vouch for any of the other companies. I know there's a lot to choose from now.
Yeah.
But the SC Electronics one has been absolutely amazing. I wanted to kind of move along to our folks who've been producing for a bit.
Yeah.
And talk about upgrades and things.
Let's upgrade you.
Let's upgrade you, like B would say. So, you have an opportunity to get a couple of new toys, a couple of new things. I'll ask you first, Lane. What's the first new thing, new toy you grabbed to upgrade your studio space? If you're updating it today.
Preamp.
Excellent call. Why?
Microphone preamp.
Why? You're actually someone that put me onto this too.
Yeah, like it's night and day, man. As soon as you plug that thing in, it's just adds the most amazing color.
Yeah.
To whatever's going into that microphone. It beefs up your signal. It's like, giving your microphone a workout. Hitting the beach. It's 90 degrees, sweaty, rippled chest, preamp.
Like Baywatch just popped in my head. That was really weird. But no, one of the things that's really important to me about working with the pre, you get that, at least if you have one that has physical knobs.
Yeah.
You start to get that association with drive and with gain structure and gain staging.
Yep.
Pretty much any modern audio interface has a built-in preamp, and a lot of them you can play with, the digital gain of it. But being able to see a fader, see a meter, and know when to come down on a vocal, come up on a vocal, drive a vocal, distort a vocal, and really get the color of a preamp.
You got a tube in there.
It gives you range.
Yeah.
And, again, when it goes back to what we were saying before about using a few microphones to get a lot of sounds, that's a great way to get a lot more distance out of a microphone.
Definitely. You just upgraded your mic. Like,
yep. You just turned your mic.
Add $200 onto the retail value of your microphone just by buying a preamp.
Going back to a lot of those really, really high-end microphones that I bought back when I wanted to make up for my Radio Shack mic. I didn't use a lot of them because I had the wrong preamps for them.
Yeah.
And if I went back and got an Avalon and a couple of those,
exactly,
I would have had a much better chain, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. I've been doing so much of this gear shopping throughout my life. I feel like I'm on the other side of the coin. And I try to upgrade my studio with things that aren't even necessarily gear.
Yeah.
So I guess a little tip that I have, update the aesthetics of your studio. One of the things that I did recently, I got plants.
Yeah.
I know that's weird, but A, having just life around is always good, but B, my whole mind trick is when I go work in the studio, I water the plants.
Yeah.
So if I come back to my studio space and the plants are sick, I know, damn it, I haven't been on my gear.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? And it makes this association with the space where you have this responsibility to get out there and create.
Yeah, it's like a body clock.
Really well said. It becomes a body clock. The other thing, though, cables.
Cables are so important and so overlooked.
If you are looking at a new drum machine and you open up your drawer right now and you have one of those really brittle red and gray Radio Shack cables from like 96.
No, thank you.
Your priorities are extremely fucked up.
Yeah, they're wrong.
I keep a couple of bad cables just to get a dirty sound out of them, but cables are one of those things, just like a good preamp, they will update any piece of gear that you have in your studio already. So spend the extra bit of money, but also spend the extra bit of time in finding a cable solution that has warranties.
Yeah.
A lot of these companies will say, hey, you freight this, it's not working, we'll send you another one. And then you can spend, a little bit more once instead of spending way more replacing these things every couple of weeks.
And do some research.
Yeah.
Ultimately, do your research. Because you don't want to just walk into Guitar Center and start buying cables right off the wall, man. Some of them sound just as bad as your cable from 96.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't even know it till you plug it in. You get home $30, $40 later on one cable, and it's like,
yep.
What's the difference, really? So do some research.
We're in the internet era. There's no excuse for you kind of jumping off of a ledge and just grabbing what's there. Go online, research what the best cables are, and then order them from Amazon.
Yeah.
Sorry, small retailers.
Sorry.
I feel bad about that, but it is what it is. Another big recommendation I have, do an audit of the furniture in your studio space and kind of check, is your gear at a good height?
Yeah.
Is it in a logical layout? Can everything that you have stay plugged in all the time so that when you're inspired, you can just jump up and work?
Yep. You want those tweeters at ear level.
You want your tweeters at ear level. You want your eyes to be at monitor level.
Yep.
I've seen so many engineers hit their 40s, their 50s, and they're hunched over.
Yeah. Oh God.
You know, because they've been sitting in chairs that, you know, are terrible for their backs, and they have things laid out improperly. It's really easy to go to IKEA and get a couple of risers, get some shelves. If you need help with it, go on Fiverr and get somebody to come and help you out. But I think just in terms of productivity, you know, the big thing about this is, can you leave everything plugged in?
Yeah.
You know, for a long time in my career, I would have half of my controllers plugged in, half of them, you know, in the closet. And then anytime I wanted to work, I had to go across a mess. And
Yep.
that's just not how you want to start your workflow.
No.
You want to be able to say, hey, I've got an idea, and walk over to your space and then get into that idea.
We have a saying, you know, if you smoke them, I'm sorry, smoke them if you got them, right?
Word.
If you got it, set it up.
Word. That's a fact.
If it's in your house, set it up.
That's a fact.
Have it ready to play, walk up, play it.
That's a fact. So another nice mid-range upgrade to the studio that I'd love to talk about. Budget hardware synths.
Yeah.
So we alluded to it a bit earlier, I guess in the first podcast, but this is kind of a new love affair for me. But we're in an era where you can get a hardware synthesizer for
So inexpensive.
so cheap.
Let's do it.
You know, $200, $300, $400, $500.
Yeah.
You're a fan of the Roland series.
Yeah, I got the System 1.
Yes.
The Iris series is dope.
Yeah.
Roland put out, put out their 808, their the
TR-8.
TB3 or the 808, the TR8, and the TB3, the bass sequencer.
Yeah.
And then they have a standalone like patch sampler or patch synth, and then they have the System 1.
Yeah.
That shit is dope.
You know,
And the mixer, the MX1.
yeah.
So everything runs into that mixer.
The one thing that, you know, a lot of people try to kind of reinforce home was, oh, the sound of analog is better. It's the sound.
Yeah.
It probably does sound better. Maybe, maybe not. Honestly, I can't really fucking tell. But for me, the real benefit of working with analog is actually putting your hand on a knob
Oh yeah.
and having it respond to your movements.
Exactly.
And also getting your eyes the fuck away from a screen.
Just get them off the computer, man.
It's more of a workflow thing,
Yeah.
you know. And I think a lot of times when synthesizer folks are trying to pitch why they do what they do, they forget about that part of it.
Mm-hmm.
But things really change when you lay a sequence down and you walk over to your synthesizer that's playing that sequence and you start turning knobs and sculpting the sound around it.
yeah.
It's a freaking great process.
It really
dude.
is a great process. And, that's why it's so important to have all these key elements in your home studio already in place.
Yeah.
So that, we do all this work to make sure our computer's running good and the signal's good and the flow of everything, the wires are good. All that just so that we don't have to look at the computer anymore
Yeah.
and get back to playing music.
Yeah. It's a good time. So I guess you mentioned the Roland series. I'd probably, in terms of my current favorite hardware synth, it's got to be that Korg Minilog.
That Minilog is dope. So dirty.
You know, to me, it's versatile. Versatility is really important to me especially for like a first synthesizer or an early synthesizer for someone. But you can get all those mid-range sounds. You
Yeah.
can get formant sounds. It's simple enough that it's approachable, but you can really dive in on a wide range of sounds.
Yeah.
We're going to wrap up in a little bit. I just wanted to talk about one more topic before we go, and that's overspending.
Do not spend too much.
How do you avoid doing it? I mean, there's so much stuff coming out. How do you keep from doing it?
The best way. A few ways. Number one, I'm gonna say it again, always research. But in order to research, you have to know what you want to do. What's your goal? What are you trying to accomplish? Do you want to produce hip hop with a certain kind of sound? You go with a certain kind of controller, synthesizer, audio interface. If you want to do rock, what DAW are you using? So really figure out what you're trying to accomplish first, and then start trimming the bucks away. Start trimming down the costs. Streamline your studio. What pieces are essential, what pieces are not essential.
That's a really, really good way of looking at it.
Yeah.
I've heard this philosophy on spending from a few people, but an old engineering buddy of mine drilled it down early and said, if you want to buy something, wait until you can afford two of them.
Yeah.
And
That's another way of doing it.
And he said, I literally mean, if you want to get an MPC, wait until you have enough money where if you walk in the store and the store clerk says, yo, if you don't buy two of these, my kid doesn't eat tonight. And you can go, okay, comfortably.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that much, don't buy one.
Don't buy it.
It sucks to hear that, but I think it's really important for us to not get caught in that loophole of buying too much gear.
Definitely.
Use the stuff that you have already
Yep.
until you can't use it anymore.
Same situation, man. I had when I was younger, I wanted a MIDI controller. And I didn't really know much about the situation. I didn't have anyone to teach me. I was just kind of like going off of things that I could pick up. And at this point, YouTube wasn't really a thing, so I couldn't really just go on YouTube. So I ended up with a MPD 16, which is dope, but wasn't really what I needed at the time.
Yep. That's one of those pieces that you want to add on.
Add on. It's not like your main piece, you know. Like,
Yep.
it could be for those who, make it rock, but it's not really it wasn't something that I wanted. It wasn't something that I needed for my studio.
Yep. I definitely did the same thing. And it's funny. It's no knock to the gear because I sold it and I wish I still had it because it was really cool.
Yeah, it would be really awesome now.
But I had a Korg pad control.
Oh, yeah.
And at the time, I was looking for something that was like a non-computer thing. Like
Yeah.
I wanted something that was like external, I could put on hardware samplers.
Exactly.
And although you could, you really couldn't.
Yeah.
And it was wasted money. And I have so many stories of that. So,
Yep.
Especially in this era where there's software versions of everything.
Yeah. You feel like a total jackass when you
just
come home and you're like,
why did I fucking buy this? And it sits in your closet. So absolutely avoid that like the plague. Any last words, my good friend?
Streamlining your studio is not hard, but it can get a little overwhelming sometimes.
Yeah.
So just take your time. There's pieces coming out every month, new MIDI controllers, new interfaces. Just think about what you want to do and figure out a way to put it together that's comfortable.
Yeah.
Don't overcomplicate it.
Just because something came out this week doesn't mean you need to have it this week. And I feel kind of bad saying that because I know about the Korg Minilog shit. It came out one week and then disappeared.
Yeah.
But really, wait.
Until you think you're ready for that next level, go splurge. But
wait.
At first, just wait.
Just wait.
Yeah.
There'll be something else tomorrow and the day after that. All right, guys, this is the Lab Science Podcast. Again, this is Professor Sense.
Captain Lean Automatic.
We are the #1 podcast covering production, business, and songwriting, and studio technique. Until next week, you guys be good.
Peace.